The first time my son-in-law humiliated my wife, I told myself to let it go. The second time, I did the same. But on a freezing Christmas Eve, when I watched my gentle wife collapse onto a stranger's polished floor with a red handprint across her face, something inside me finally went silent and dangerous. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 59 years old, and for 34 years, I worked as a structural estimator for a construction company in the city of Leeds, England. I was never the loudest man in a room. I believed arguments created more problems than they solved. If someone insulted me, I ignored it. If a neighbor behaved badly, I avoided them. I thought patience made a man strong. Looking back, I had confused patience with surrender. My wife, Helen, deserved better than the man I had been. Helen is 57 and works 3 days a week at a small flower shop near the old market. She remembers everyone's birthday, feeds stray cats behind the shop, and somehow always knows when someone needs help before they ask. For 32 years, she had been the kindest person I knew. Our daughter, Amelia, married Victor Harrington 4 years earlier. Victor was charming when we first met him. He wore expensive suits, spoke softly, and knew exactly when to smile. He worked in private banking and came from a wealthy family. His mother, Lorraine, owned several commercial properties and treated money as if it gave her the right to measure other people's worth. From the beginning, she looked down on us. We lived in a modest brick house. Victor and Amelia lived in a large home outside the city. Lorraine never directly called us poor. She was too clever for that. Instead, she made little comments about Helen's clothes, my old car, or the simple life we enjoyed. I ignored every one of them. Then came Christmas Eve. Lorraine had invited nearly 30 guests to her country house. Helen spent 2 days preparing her famous potato gratin because Amelia had asked her to bring it. We arrived shortly after 6. The house was warm, bright, and decorated like something from a magazine. At dinner, Helen carried the heavy glass dish toward the table. Victor stepped backwards while laughing at something one of his colleagues had said. He hit Helen's shoulder. The dish slipped, it shattered. Food splashed across the floor and onto Victor's trousers. Helen immediately apologized. Victor slapped her, hard. The entire room went silent. Helen fell against the floor, stunned and shaking. I moved toward her, but Lorraine stepped in front of me. "Look at the mess she has made," she said coldly. "Take your wife and leave, Daniel." 30 people watched. Not one defended her. I helped Helen stand, picked up her glasses, wrapped her in her coat, and led her outside without saying a word. I thought the worst thing that happened that night was the slap. 10 minutes later, sitting in my car, my daughter climbed into the back seat. Then I saw the bruises on her arm, and I realized Christmas Eve had only just begun. Amelia climbed into the back seat and slammed the door behind her. Snow clung to her dark coat, and her breathing came in short, frightened bursts. Helen turned immediately, reaching for her hand. "Sweetheart, what happened?" Amelia tried to smile. "Nothing, I just wanted to come with you." But when she pulled her sleeve back, I saw it. Dark bruises covered her wrist. For a moment, I couldn't speak. There were older marks beneath the fresh ones, yellowing bruises, purple shadows, and clear fingerprints around her arm. I turned slowly in my seat and looked directly at my daughter. "Amelia," I said quietly, "who did this?" Her face collapsed. "Dad, please. Was it Victor?" She looked down. That was answer enough. Helen covered her mouth. The red mark on her own cheek was beginning to darken, but she barely seemed aware of it anymore. Her attention was fixed entirely on our daughter. "How long?" I asked. Amelia began crying. "Since the first year of our marriage." I felt something cold move through my chest. She told us everything. Victor had never hit her in public. He was too careful for that. At first he controlled small things: what she wore, who she called, how much money she spent. Then he became angry when she disagreed with him. A hard grip on the wrist became a shove. A shove became a punch against the wall beside her head. Eventually, He stopped pretending he would never hit her. He always says he's sorry afterwards, Amelia whispered. Then he buys me something. And his mother knows? Helen asked. Amelia nodded. Lorraine had known for years. According to Amelia, Lorraine called Victor's violence stress. She told her to stop provoking him and learn how to keep her husband calm. I gripped the steering wheel. For most of my life, I had believed that walking away made me the bigger man. That night, I finally understood what my silence had cost. I started the car. You're not going back there, I said. Amelia stared at me. He'll come looking for me. Then he can look. He knows people, Dad. His family has connections. I looked at her through the rearview mirror. He does not own you. We drove home. Neither Helen nor Amelia slept much that night. I sat downstairs at the kitchen table until morning, drinking coffee that went cold between my hands. I knew one thing clearly. I wasn't going to attack Victor. I wasn't going to threaten him. And I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of calling me unstable. Men like Victor expected emotional reactions. They knew how to survive shouting matches and family arguments. What they didn't expect was evidence. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I called an old friend named Martin Hale. Martin had spent nearly 30 years working as a forensic accountant before retiring. He was the kind of man who could look at a company balance sheet and find a lie hiding between two perfectly ordinary numbers. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, Daniel, get Amelia to photograph every injury. Save every threatening message. Don't delete a single thing. What else? I'll start looking at Victor. Why? Martin's voice changed. Because men who believe they are untouchable usually leave more than one trail behind. For the first time since we had left Lorraine's house, I felt completely calm. I looked upstairs, toward the room where my wife and daughter were finally asleep. Victor Harrington thought he had frightened us into silence. He had no idea that our silence was over. By the following afternoon, Martin Hale was sitting across from me in my garage, with 3 folders spread across my workbench. He looked older than I remembered. His gray hair had thinned, and his glasses kept sliding down his nose, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Before we talk about Victor, he said, tell me exactly what you know about his work. He manages commercial lending for a private bank. Martin nodded. And Lorraine? Property developer. Several companies. Shopping centers, office blocks, warehouses. He opened the first folder. That combination interests me. For the next hour, Martin explained what he had found using publicly available company records, property transactions, and financial filings. Victor had approved several large loans connected to companies controlled by his mother. That alone did not prove a crime, but the numbers didn't make sense. Several properties had been valued at far less than the money borrowed against them. Some of the excess funds appeared to have moved through smaller companies before disappearing into accounts connected to luxury purchases and personal debts. I stared at the documents. You're saying Victor has been stealing from the bank? I'm saying there are serious questions that investigators should ask. Martin was careful with his words. He had spent too many years dealing with evidence to make reckless accusations. But if the records are accurate, he continued, Victor may have much bigger problems than a family argument. I thought about Amelia's bruises, about Helen lying on Lorraine's polished floor. What do we do? First, you protect your family. That afternoon, Amelia met with a solicitor specializing in domestic abuse cases. She brought photographs of her injuries, copies of Victor's messages, and medical documentation. The emergency protection order was granted. Victor was forbidden from approaching Amelia, Helen, or our home. When Amelia received the confirmation, she cried quietly, not from fear, from relief. Then Victor started sending messages. You are making a mistake. You will regret this. Your father cannot protect you forever. Amelia showed me every message. I saved them all. She did not reply. Meanwhile, Martin arranged a meeting with a financial crimes investigator through a former professional contact. I didn't need to understand every legal process. Martin handled the documents. The authorities would decide what the evidence meant. 2 days later, Victor received a visit at his office. His bank suspended him while an internal investigation began. That evening, my phone rang. It was Lorraine. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "Daniel, you've taken this too far." I almost laughed. "Your son slapped my wife. He was angry. He beat my daughter. You have no proof." "Yes, we do." Her voice hardened. "You don't understand the consequences of challenging this family." I looked through the kitchen window. Amelia was sitting beside Helen in the garden room. For the first time in days, my daughter was smiling. "I understand them perfectly now," I said. Then I ended the call. 3 nights later, Martin phoned me just after 9. "Daniel," he said. Something in his voice made me stand. "What happened?" The investigators obtained enough information to move forward. I walked outside into the cold night air. Across the street, everything was quiet. Victor's world was still standing. But somewhere, beyond that darkness, the first cracks had already begun to spread. And this time, no amount of money was going to hold them together. The following Thursday morning, Victor Harrington still believed he could fix everything. That was the mistake men like him always made. They believed consequences were problems for other people. According to Amelia, Victor had spent the previous evening calling solicitors, senior managers, and family friends. He told anyone willing to listen that his wife had fabricated abuse allegations and that I was trying to destroy him because of a Christmas Eve misunderstanding. But the investigators were no longer interested in his version of events. They had documents, they had transaction records, and they had questions Victor could not answer. At 10:20 that morning, officers arrived at the Harrington family offices with legal authorization to examine computers, company files, and financial records. Victor was questioned separately, while Lorraine watched from behind the glass doors of her private office. By midday, his bank had formally dismissed him. The news spread quickly. One of Lorraine's business partners withdrew from a major development project. Another demanded an emergency review of their accounts. Within days, lenders began freezing credit connected to several of her companies. The woman who had once treated us as insignificant was suddenly discovering how quickly wealthy friends disappeared when investigators started asking questions. Then Victor made another mistake. He violated the protection order. Amelia was leaving a cafe with Helen when Victor's car appeared at the end of the street. He didn't get close enough to touch her, but he stopped, shouted her name, and followed slowly as she walked away. Helen immediately called the police. Victor drove off before officers arrived. But a nearby security camera recorded everything. The next morning, his solicitor contacted the authorities. Victor was told to surrender himself for questioning. He did. And this time, Lorraine couldn't talk her way around it. A week later, Amelia returned to the house she once shared with him to collect the rest of her belongings. She was accompanied by officers and a representative from her legal team. I drove Helen there, but waited outside. Lorraine stood near the entrance when Amelia walked up the path. For the first time, she didn't look powerful. She looked exhausted. "Amelia," she said softly, "please, this has gone far enough." Amelia stopped. Lorraine's eyes filled with tears. Victor could lose everything. My daughter looked at her for several seconds. Then she slowly pushed back her sleeve. The fading bruises on her wrist were still visible. "So could I," Amelia replied. Lorraine said nothing. Amelia carried her boxes to the car. Clothes, photographs, books, and the small things she had once believed would make that house feel like home. Before getting inside, she looked back one final time. "I spent years believing your family was too powerful to challenge," she said. "I was wrong." Then she closed the car door. I watched the house disappear in my rear-view mirror. It was strange. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry either. I simply felt certain, for decades, I had believed protecting the people I loved meant keeping every situation calm. Now, I knew better. Sometimes protecting your family means refusing to stay quiet when silence becomes another form of permission, and Victor's reckoning was not over yet. 6 months later, summer had arrived in Leeds, and the snow from that Christmas Eve felt like it belonged to another lifetime. But none of us had forgotten what happened. Victor's financial investigation eventually led to formal charges. After months of legal proceedings, he accepted responsibility for multiple financial offenses connected to the improper handling of commercial loans and company funds. His career was over, his assets were reviewed, and the life he had built around money and control began to disappear piece by piece. I didn't attend every hearing. I had spent too much of my life watching Victor dominate rooms. I had no interest in giving him any more of my time. The divorce between Victor and Amelia was finalized in early June. She moved into a small flat less than 15 minutes from our house. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. The windows faced a narrow park filled with old trees, and sunlight reached her kitchen every morning. The first time I visited, I noticed something that nearly broke my heart. She was laughing, not forcing a polite smile, actually laughing. Helen had brought over food, and Amelia had burned the first batch of garlic bread because she was talking too much. The three of us stood in her kitchen, laughing at the smoke alarm until tears ran down Helen's face. For a moment, we were simply a family again. Lorraine lost several important business relationships as the investigation widened. Some of her projects stalled, others were sold. The woman who once believed wealth could protect her from every consequence discovered that money was powerful, but not powerful enough to erase the truth forever. I didn't celebrate her losses. Revenge had never been the point, justice was. And there was a difference. One warm evening in July, Helen and I sat in our back garden with 2 cups of tea. The roses along the fence were in full bloom, and somewhere nearby, a neighbor was cutting grass. Helen reached across and rested her hand on my knee. The bruise on her face had disappeared months earlier. Only a thin scar remained near her wrist from the broken glass. "I've been thinking," she said. "That's usually dangerous." She smiled. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me and said, "You blame yourself, don't you?" I stared into my tea. For not seeing what Victor was doing to Amelia, for always staying quiet, I nodded. The truth was, I did. I had ignored too many warning signs because I wanted to believe everything would be fine. I had told myself that avoiding conflict made me a peaceful man. But peace without safety is not peace. It is fear wearing a polite face. Helen squeezed my hand. "You can't change what you didn't know," she said. "But you changed what happened next." That night, I understood something I should have learned years earlier. Being a good man does not mean allowing cruel people to hurt those you love. You don't have to shout. You don't have to become violent. You don't have to lose yourself. Sometimes, standing up means documenting the truth, asking for help, and refusing to look away. Victor and Lorraine had mistaken our quiet nature for weakness. They were wrong. I had spent most of my life believing strength was the ability to endure anything. Now I knew better. Real strength is knowing when enough is enough, and having the courage to protect the people who cannot keep fighting alone. That was the lesson I carried with me from that Christmas, and I never confused silence with peace again.